Welcome to Humans of Magic. My guest this week is Rob Bliss. Rob is a Magic the Gathering illustrator and has illustrated some iconic cards during the early 90s of the game. He's also a concept artist and has done notable work for franchises like the Harry Potter movies and Guardians of the Galaxy. We're going to talk about Rob's creative method, his honest views on the industry, and how he came up and caught his first break as an artist. Kind of an origin story of sorts, but we will also go into the way that he approaches his craft and how he managed to carve out a space for himself as a concept artist. Rob will also set the record straight on the infamous phallic images found in his magic art. Whether you're a fan of Rob's from his 2080 days, his magic work, or his Hollywood work, I think there's something interesting here for you. Without further ado, this is Humans of Magic with Rob Bliss. Do you get interviewed a lot?
No, not a lot, but I mean, the last couple of months has been a little bit like I've been to. I went to Playgrounds in Eindhoven last month, and then off the back of that, they invited me to go to Berlin. So it sort of feels like I've done a couple of um, engaging with people type things. What would you call them? Not interviews, but
I
well,
don't know,
actually, yeah,
speaking engagements.
interacting with people, talking about my work.
I saw the interview or the panel you had with your friend. There was a lady that interviewed the both of you. I think that was part of Playgrounds, yeah?
You're talking about the one that they put out on Lightbox. Yeah, that was when I was talking with Dermot Power.
With Dermot, yes.
Yeah,
Yes. I
yeah.
remember there was a bit of a disagreement. Not really disagreement, it's not that strong, but there was a bit of like I think the both of you were talking about your artistic influences and
Mm.
was it Bisley?
Bisley.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so I think one of you said that heavily influenced, the other person said not so influenced, or there was like another like pre-Bisley artist that was influential. Do you remember that part of the conversation at
yeah.
all?
But I mean, no, I mean, we conversationally sort of disagree all the time about stuff, but as well, of course, agreeing about stuff. But that was, I think, my point was that I don't think any artist has influenced a small group of people like that. Um, that we happen to be a part of. However strong Dermot's influences are from other people, we've sort of the point I was making that we've forged a few friendships out of the fact that we all just love the same artist at the same time. Just like being into the same band at the same time and all heavily into it. You could
Mhm.
cite other bands as influences if you didn't want the world to think that that's your only influence. But I think he had a very specific influence on us at that time because he was a little bit of a phenomenon at that time because he was doing fully painted art comic strips in 2000 AD, and it was, I don't know, we just hadn't seen anything like that before. It just flipped a switch for a lot of us, and when we all started getting into doing, we sort of met up through comic conventions and got each other's numbers and stuff from 2000 AD, and then we'd just ring each other up, and we ended up just having these sort of friendships off the back of it. Having said that, Dermot actually I didn't meet until a few years later, but I knew of him before. But yeah, I think that was the sort of point that I was making. Although having said that, Dermot probably does have is a lot more interested in other artists than I am. If that makes sense. I don't
Mm.
really have a very short list of people that I can genuinely say have influenced me, which is probably to my detriment. But there you go.
As someone who used to be an artist, I used to paint and draw when I was a teenager. I used to have
Yeah.
like trading cards or like or read novels where like the cover was painted by the Star Wars
Yeah.
novel cover was painted by a certain artist. So I'd be like trying this style and trying this other style and just like trying to find my own way. And I'm just trying to just to make this a question like when you were younger or getting started, like how did you end up with your style? Because I think there's a Rob Bliss style that is now kind of the lexicon of Rob. But when you were younger, how did that come about? Were you also doing something similar, like just exploring different different types of art and technique, or like how do you eventually land on the style that you're now best known for?
Well, I don't. I mean, I didn't. I suppose I started to develop my style once I'd left college. I mean, that's the irony of education for you, is that um, I reserved actually doing any hard work in my life until I'd fully removed myself from education, because I didn't really enjoy the time I spent doing anything away from drawing at school. I wasn't the greatest student. I mean, I did enjoy history and some subjects like that, but the rest of them, I just would get bored and start pissing around in class and sort of being distracting to other. Well, actually, having said that, I think I ended up just being knocked down the grades in classes. So as anybody else left in my class was probably just trying to distract me as much as I was trying to distract them anyway. But my all the way through education, my main thing that I was really, really into was doing art. And the rest of it just felt like I was treading water until I could stop, until I could get away from doing it. I just was like, I know what I want to do. I've known what I want to do since I was incredibly young, which is just sort of draw pictures. And I just can't wait to get all these other subjects out of the way and having to write, so I can get on with my own thing. And then, ironically, when you go to at school, they were pretty supportive actually, and they had a good art department there, and we used to sort of do our own stuff there and print T-shirts during the lunch breaks and whatever. Just hang out there. It was a good school to go to for encouraging art as well as encouraging people to go to Oxford and Cambridge. But it was when I left college, when I left that part of the education system and went to do A levels around about 17 or something, and then I went on to do an actual degree when I was about 18, 19, 20, about 3 years. All of that was started to become you were suddenly involved in something that was, you were heavily and this is something that you hear about a lot in people who are interested in fancy art, but you were actively discouraged from doing anything that involved um, fancy art. They wanted you to explore other areas, which was probably um, important. But for me, I was so wanted to get back to being a 5-year-old just drawing any old bollocks that you wanted to draw, usually involving animals or things exploding or something being attacked or shot or yeah, and always trying to get back to that moment. So I wasn't interested yeah, I think what it boils down to is my entire time education, I wasn't interested in learning anything from anyone. Nobody came up and showed me something that I was interested in learning, um, which is nothing I should be proud of, but that's just the way it was. And then as soon as I left higher education, I had my degree, I was then free to start painting anything I wanted to. And honestly, up until that point, I hadn't been. The whole education system was geared towards either stopping you from doing art or stopping you from doing the art you want to do. Nowadays, you could go to college to learn to be a concept artist. That just didn't exist when I was younger. There was a certain aspect of it which was about developing a style, but really the artists around at that time were people like Ralph Steadman or Raymond Briggs or something like that, in terms of illustration anyway, magazine illustration. And there weren't a lot of people around at the time that I really noticed as illustrators as well. The funny thing was, when I looked at comic artists, it didn't really, I was never a fanboy. It never really occurred to me that these guys had names, apart from the odd person like Brian Boland or whatever in 2000 AD. I, I met other artists who just knew the name of everybody and was interested in everything. And that never ever occurred to me. And I think the first time that really, really happened with me, big time, was with when I'd left college and Simon Bisley started doing Slain, 2000 AD, and it was like a eureka moment for me, because I just genuinely wasn't interested in anything to that extent before that moment, or free enough to pursue going home and trying to paint like that, you know. And beyond that, I was lucky that I wasn't able to rip Simon Bisley off exactly. I mean, it made no sense to paint or draw any other way, but it was fucking annoying for him, you know, that this bunch of younger artists all suddenly try to emulate him, and that which is what happened. But thankfully, I think that I had my own thing going on enough, and I just wasn't. Maybe my inability to be studious was worked in my favour, you know. So there's a little up until that point, I wasn't really developing my style, but I think there was a style there that emerged through trying to emulate another artist, you know. That's probably a very convoluted way of answering your question. Does that make sense?
It's not convoluted at all. Actually,
Okay.
that's the real answer of what happened.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm kind of remembering it as I go along, as it were. But
Do you remember what it was like to see Bisley's work for the first time? Did it hit you like a bolt of lightning, or what was it like, if you can recall?
well, it's I don't know because you get the older you get, the more you realise that your memories are either incorrect or they're influenced by talks with other people and stuff. But my memory now of it through conversations with other people is I think we were sort of at least a couple of us were sort of hit by going past W.H. Smith or something one day and just seeing he did a wraparound cover. I think it was of Slane having a warp spasm in a battle or something. I might be wrong, but that was the energy of it anyway. And I think that kind of a couple of us was sort of like, you know, when you're walking past the shop and you look and you're like, what the fuck? And you look and you stop and you're, you know, I think it was. I mean, it wasn't. I couldn't understand people's pure joy in art back then. I mean, I still can't really because my mixture of how I felt about it was like, oh my god, that's amazing, and who is this person? And then the next thing was like, I suppose a certain level of
Well, you're on the way to the
jealousy.
pub, or then you're on to some other thing, right?
Well, no, because I mean, well, no, that I mean, at that point I've left college and I'm struggling. You're um, you're trying to make up for lost time, so there's no going to the pub necessarily going on here. It's I've moved to the capital. I've got a year to try and establish myself in art somehow. I'm being horribly sort of I'm horribly shocked by the fact that nobody's really that impressed with my work so far, you know, which is just, of course, normal, but you don't realize it at the time. You know, you're just a young person and you haven't developed your craft enough and you're trying to get some traction somewhere. So if you see something like that, there's a sort of, if you've got money in your pocket, you're more likely to go home and look through it, and then you've got a mixture of emotions because you're like excited by it and you want to do something like that. But then when you start trying to do it, you're just, you know, you're doing a shit version of it. So then you're sort of your relationship with it isn't pure pleasure. It's there's some kind of conflict going on there. You know, you love it, but you're just so frustrated by it. You know. I think occasionally you meet
Yeah.
something or you see something that you relate to heavily. I think there was a slightly kind of there was something about his style that was a little bit um, and I'm hating to use the word punky because I don't want to go necessarily down the road of like trying to make out that's too important a word, but the ethos behind the whole punk thing was when I was a kid was, um, which is why so much creativity came out of it. I think in this country was the DIY aspect of it, the do-it-yourself aspect of it. You know, you had examples of bands that played in such a way that made you believe that you could just pick up guitar and decide amongst your mates who's going to play what, and then you can just, you know, within a couple of by the end of one session playing together, if you'd put two chords together, you had a song. and a lot of people did that. But Simon Bisley's artwork had that feel about it as well. It was foolishly you thought I could do that, which wasn't true. But I
Right,
don't know
right.
how. I
There's a lot
don't
of
know how.
craft behind it, but you don't.
Yeah, there was something and also he changed. There were so many styles he had within his style that you could sort of, half done stuff that was amazing. That you were just It's amazing that he just left it like that. There was always this. I don't know whether other people had it or it was just me and a smattering of other sycophants, but there was a feeling that we could do that as well. Whereas when I looked at Brian Bolland's work or even Glenn Fabry's work, I didn't think I could do that. That felt like you were looking at classically trained artists' work that was beyond me. But with his work, there was an energy to it. I think Frank Frazetta is probably like that as well. There's a kind of it's deceptively simple. Would that be, or deceptively? It made you think that you could do something like that, and then of course you spend the rest of your life proving that you can't. But it was, you know. But I think listen, I think there's lots of great art out there which comes from people trying to emulate something and failing, and then ending up with their own thing. Um, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I mean, you get various bands that have a song where they're kind of like, oh, that was us trying to do reggae, and then you can hear it just
Yeah,
about in the song
yeah.
somewhere, but they couldn't do reggae, so they
Right.
just ended up with this kind of other thing, which was
You end
interesting.
up with a unique style. Like maybe it
Yeah,
was the
yeah.
Police doing reggae, but then it just
I
became the
suppose they're an
Police, right?
example. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, the irony is you end up with a unique style by trying to rip somebody off and failing
Yeah.
at ripping them off.
Right.
But there were no thunderbolts and lightning, etc., seeing his work, but there was a visceral sort of reaction to it, a like what the fuck moment. I mean, you must have that as well. Just when you're younger and you hear a particular type of genre of music for the first time, you're like, you have a little what the fuck is that moment. You don't have to pretend to be interested. You're just like, this is all I want to listen to, or you know. And yeah, so that was what it felt like. Like, what the fuck is that? If I had the money in my pocket, I'd buy it and take it home.
It's interesting because it does make me think about, I guess there's just a general willingness to be foolish and not worry about how hard it is to do something when you're younger. Because I can think about when I heard music as a young person, I thought, I want to try that too. I want to try to, play
And
or
what
write
and
my
what
own
genre
song.
and what genre
Yeah.
was that?
I'm just talking about just pop music or guitar based music in the 90s, just
Yeah,
hearing it on a cassette tape or on the radio,
yeah.
because that's what we had back then. Even something that is deceptively complex, like the Beatles, right? Because I think all of McCartney's and Lennon's writing
I,
is honestly
let's
just
just
genius.
is the
But they
Beatles.
craft
This is
something that's very simple on the outside.
Yeah, but is that deceptively simple or deceptively complex? I was having this debate with a friend of mine that we literally disagreed on the meaning of putting deceptively in front of another word.
Like the what side of it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fuck, I can't even remember what the argument was now. I would have said that the Beatles were deceptively simple because you think it's simple, but
Okay, yeah. So what I meant
deceptively.
was, when you hear the song,
Yeah,
it seems like anyone could have written it,
yeah,
but in actuality,
which
no.
means it's deceptively
Deceptively
simple.
simple, I think.
You said
Right,
deceptively complex.
right. Whereas deceptively complex, so I think I should rephrase that because deceptively complex suggests that on the surface, it's very hard to it's complicated. It's very hard to replicate. But maybe I don't know, I can't think of an example right now. Maybe there's things like on the inverse where it seems complicated, but when you actually learn it, it's actually not that hard.
Yeah,
So that would be
yeah,
deceptively complex.
yeah. I thought I'd
Yeah.
resolved this argument about the use of deceptively inside my head, but I'm going to have to go back to my friend and continue the argument at some point because I can't. can't even remember what my point, what what I thought it meant in the end. Anyway, but
Yeah.
I completely get what you're saying, and I
Yeah.
think that's an important part of it. Is you think, oh, I could do that, and then the frustration of the failure is what means you're already caught in the spider's web of it. You end up
Yeah.
investing time in it, and also you probably try to show off a little bit. Before you know it, you're like, well, I'm gonna look like an idiot if I don't actually get good at this now, because I've been sort of harping on about how I could do
Yeah,
that now.
you're kind of forced to make it work somehow. Yes, you're
Yeah,
committed.
yeah, yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that a lot of stuff I certainly did when I was younger was sort of took that course, where you have this arrogance, I suppose, and you go running at this thing that you're sure you can do, but by the time you realize it's way harder than you thought it was going to be, you just think there's no way round but through now. I'm just going to have to get better at this because A, I've got nothing else to do. B, I'm going to hate myself if I don't. C, I've sort of invested so much of it in terms of making out to other people that I'm going to be good at this, or I think I'm good at this, that I can't walk away with my tail between my legs now. So I'm just going to have to keep on going, and I don't know. That strength of initial arrogance is a blessing and a curse, because in some ways it's the weight of it is going to carry you through the up and coming difficulties. But yeah, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I don't know at what point I don't know. At a certain point, you just learn to bullshit your way through it. I think you half get better, half learn to bullshit your way through whatever it is you're
Mm.
doing.
Well, there's an American saying, I think it's American, fake it until you make it. Fake it till you make it. Something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. There must be a little bit more faking
Obviously,
involved in that.
that's not a very generous statement because I don't think in the end you're not really faking it, but you have to believe that you're capable of
Yeah,
until you are capable one day.
yeah. Well, there must be a kind of fake it till you make out that you can make it. Does that make sense?
Doesn't quite ring off the same way off the tip of the tongue. So so I'm going to caveat this because I
Yeah,
heard you loud and clear. I think even when we talked last time, it was like there's a certain frailty of human memory that sometimes you don't remember exactly what it was like back then. It's only like other people reminding you or a narrative that is created over time. So having said
yeah,
that, can you remember as a struggling artist, like what did you do? Like from the moment you saw these influences and you kind of, as you said, you're trying to make it work no matter what. Like, how did you improve your craft? Did you, like, were you in your studio just like putting out pieces, like 5 pieces a day? Or like, how did you work your way to become a viable artist? Basically, I'm trying to
yeah,
figure that part out, understanding that the historical looking back is can be challenging, but
yeah.
what's your memory of it?
Well, first off, so I left college, and then the next move was um, to move to London. So that was the next thing, and somebody had a cheap room going in their place they were living in. So I moved up there for a little while. So I initially moved from Brighton up to Brixton, and back then we had. I mean, I haven't been on the what do you call it? We used to call it the dole system. Basically, get, money off the government if you're out of work. Back then we had a thing called the Enterprise Allowance Scheme, which basically the government would pay you X amount a week for a year and your rent, and you had a year to set up a small business. And so that was what everybody was doing, I guess, when they left college. You set up a small business, and my small business was becoming an illustrator. So I knew I had a year to move to London and try and get established. So that's what I did. So I moved to London, to Brixton, and then I moved in with my brother, who moved back from Japan, who was an illustrator. He's several years ahead of me, so he was already doing well. and I spent every day working on my portfolio. So, and I was very lucky to be able to do that as well. I appreciate a lot of young people at the moment don't have that kind of assistance from the government, you know. But so that's what it was like. It was every day was get up in the morning, have breakfast, get on with work, have lunch, get on with work in the afternoon, and maybe even work through the evening because my brother would be getting on with professional work one end of the room, and I'd be getting on with doing my portfolio at the other end of the room. Then I'd go and see people. You'd ring up magazines and and um, and go and see the art director. And then every time you'd go and see them, they would you would get uh, criticism of what you were doing right or wrong, and but never any work. So it was so then you'd go back to your flat, and then you'd spend the next couple of weeks adding whatever they thought you needed to your portfolio. And that sort of gap grew between going to see people because you were never being given work. You were always just being given a critique of what was wrong with your portfolio, you know. So it was a fucking tough year of doing that. I remember it was about a year and a half, I think, before I started to get a little bit of traction. And it was incredibly stressful, you know, horribly stressful. And but I treated it as a job, and I think I always fall back on that now as well. If there's no work or something, then you sort of treat learning other bits of software as a job or anything. You just keep the structure in your day and you keep going with it, you know. Because I mean, as a freelancer, you have to keep yourself mentally sort of in a happy place one way or another, because you could otherwise other worries will come back in. But yeah, it was. I'm trying to think of anything interesting to say about it, but it was just very very stressful, but involved having to do it all day every day. But what happened in the end was I was literally running out of money. I think at this time I had like a 1 month left of rent and stuff, so I went to decided that I was going to have to get a job, a normal job. So I thought I'll start with a list of places I'd like to work, and one of them was Forbidden Planet, which was a comic shop in London. And I went down to have an interview for that, and I took a sketchbook with me. And the manager sort of had a look at my sketchbook whilst we were talking or whatever. And I didn't get the job, but he put me in contact with 2000 AT or 2000 AD, or the people who own 2000 AD. And within about 3 weeks of that, I had a comic strip. I mean, like just no, I mean, it was
Wow.
yeah. I mean, it was literally like through giving up, I created the opportunity to um,
Just
get
a
in.
just a chance encounter, really, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But that's the nature of moving to a capital, isn't it? If you move to a big city, you'll
More opportunities.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I sort of I one of the little things I'll say to people, because I went to Playgrounds at the weekend, which is an industry event where a lot of people go to try and soak up the wisdom of old people like me that have been in the industry for a while. And you know, I do tell people they need to create their own luck. You know, one of their jobs going forward is to try and create their own luck. And so yeah, I guess that's what's happened. That's what happened in that particular situation. Even though I wasn't creating my own luck, but I think I probably learned a lesson off the back of it, which is also yeah. I guess moving to the capital is a good idea, and but I think these events where people can just go and meet other people nowadays, which didn't really exist when I was younger, the kind of another form of luck making, as it were.
There's something here too, which is, as I'm interpreting it, which is, yes, it was a chance encounter and you met somebody because you're in the capital, but you also had to have your portfolio be good enough at that time that you met the person at Forbidden Planet, the manager,
Yeah.
for you to make the impressions. So it's like you couldn't have done that had you not worked like every day for a
Yeah,
year or a year and a
yeah,
half,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like that
yeah,
that's the preparation part that
yeah.
intersects with that opportunity.
Yeah, you've got to you've got. I mean, look,
Yeah.
that lucky
You
encounter's
got to
going to
back it
happen at
up.
some point, but you've got to have be prepared for it.
Right.
I'm just repeating what you said in a different way, but yeah,
I'm just repeating what you said.
yeah.
Yeah. Now, having said that, were you prepared for it? Because I know from watching the panel you had with Dermot that you're not a particularly big fan of the comic book industry. So, what was it like as a young person heading into that world, really?
Oh, but that's another story. I mean, it's a little bit like you. So yeah, so I mean, I after struggling for a long, long time, I got given. I mean, I did a little other work for 2000 AD first, or the magazine, but I'll skip to the comic bit because it's more sort of pertinent. But it was I was given a 36 page comic strip called The Clown to do, and it was absolutely amazing until I started to actually do it, and then it was. I've never seen the minute hand of a clock go round so quickly on the wall, you know. And I worked 7 days a week to try and get my first. I mean, it was just if I thought that if if I didn't realize stress existed before I left college, I then found out another higher level of stress, which was having to do the fucking job you've managed to earn yourself, you know, because trying to get the work is one kind of level of stress. Because let's face, I mean, when I was a student, I wasn't being tested on anything, you know. I didn't even. I mean, I got a third when I left college. I literally was such an awful student, but I wasn't being tested. There was no, I wasn't up against anything, you know. So meeting the real world and failing straight away, that was a sort of a test that led to me just, you know, putting my blood pressure up through the roof. And then when I actually got the work, then that was a whole nother level of fucking stress on top of that, you know. And which makes me just start picturing John Cleese in Faulty Towers or something, you know. But um, yeah, so I had 36 pages of this comic strip to do, and I managed to get that in on time. But then after that, I sort of my timing was fucking wasn't fucking awful, but it wasn't quite as good as that, you know. Because I was just I burned out very very quickly. I learned about burnout very quickly doing comics. So whatever it was you were picking up in that conversation with Dermot, it was probably me saying something like working in comics was way too much work for reward. I mean, it literally just was. I did a couple of strips for 2000 AD. Then I was like, I've got to find a way to do one image and get paid for doing that. You know, be able to concentrate on that. I mean, I hugely admire anyone that could do comics, but it wasn't something that I wasn't built for it. You know, and I don't think even today that I don't think they're particularly compensated for the amount they put into it. I think it's a labour of love for a lot of them. You know. Plus, you might hit it off really big in comics. You might be Todd McFarlane, or you know, you might invent the next Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or whatever. But that
Hmm.
was the yeah.
Yeah. I have to ask here, like, is there something just about you and your art that's like, is there something about wanting to make it as good as possible? Because when you're doing comic book art, I have to assume that because there's like a clock that is there a different Rob Bliss that's like making comic book art as opposed to something else? Like, or is it the same and therefore it becomes very demanding because every panel has to be like up to your excellence standards or your personal standards?
Yeah, I think like any other person, artist, I just throw myself into it. I just want to create the best thing I can create, you know. And it doesn't matter what it is. Still want it to feel good. I mean the whole kind of system of drawing involves a sort of a feedback with putting something down on a page, and it either looks good or it looks bad, and your urge is to keep pulling it somewhere where or pushing it somewhere where it's going to look good, you know. And so that's the push and pull of it, with me at least anyway, is okay, I've got a finite amount of time, let's get on with it. So you know, you're always up against it time wise, and then from then on you're just herding cats until it starts to look good, and then I try and grow that bit out. You know, okay, that I mean, the funny thing was, look back on comics, it was you'd end up with one good panel on a page, but you've run out of time, so you have to go on to the next one, and then you end up with two good panels on a page, and then you have to go on to the next one. And the dream was one day to do a comic page where you were happy with all the panels. Do you know what I mean? And
Mhm.
it was actually just simpler to just try and reduce it down to one picture on a page at the end of the day. And that was, but
Yeah. Instead of
yeah, I
trying
mean,
to play or pitch the perfect game. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm not. My approach really is like just jump in the deep end and keep fucking around until something comes out the other end. You know, control accidents until
Yeah.
it looks like I intended it from the beginning. You know.
Right. That's the deception, right? That's the final thing where it's deceptively simple, but it's not.
Yeah, although having said that, for a long, long time, I really didn't even understand the idea of composition. Genuinely, until quite, you know, up until the age of 30 or something, really didn't really understand the idea of composition, you know, until somebody sort of was talking to me about it, and I was. This goes back to me being a horrible student, I guess. They were like saying,
Oh,
"Didn't
they
you?"
probably covered that and
Yeah,
you just
yeah,
yeah.
like at college, didn't they do composition? No. You know, when you get given a circle and a triangle and a square, and you've got to put them together on a page to, oh, well, no. And I probably would have fucking
Right.
hated it
Well,
anyway.
also the teaching methods are not good. Yeah.
No, but also I did.
Yeah.
Listen, I just had such a strong urge to just draw a dinosaur eating a spaceship from a young age. You know, and there's no
Right.
class on
Right.
earth that's going to teach you composition with a dinosaur, a spaceship, and a Roman legion or
Right.
something. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
With that, so
Hmm.
that's all I really, really wanted to get out of my system. So it would have been impossible to have taught me anything, I think. But that's maybe something I learned over
Hmm.
time was because I'm trying to sort of make out to you that I'm really not that systematic about it. But having said that, that's one thing that I do know is that if you don't get some form of composition right at the beginning, your picture's not really going to ever work. There's always going to be something you can't put your finger on, or you're going to get stuck doing some annoying little detail which is never going to work, and you'll always remember those pictures,
Hmm.
you know, just those pictures that just like soaked up all your patience and effort, and they were still awful, and I'd say 90% of that is probably just bad composition. So I would say that maybe
Hmm.
part of the process for me is to at least work towards that in terms of getting an image together. But the images that I decided a long time ago that I hated doing printed work. I hated doing finished work for people. So ending up doing concept work was great because you're doing work as part of a process. You're doing a design drawing. It's always a very finished rough as opposed to a shitty, not quite finished picture. You know. So I like
You
drawings.
found the
Personally,
sweet
I like,
spot. Yeah.
yeah, I like my drawings to be functional, so they have an excuse to be rough around the edges. You know. But
Ah, okay.
yeah. But then maybe there's a part of me doesn't appreciate that something finished can be rough around the edges, you know. I
Right.
mean, art is full of images that are just fucking incredibly rough, but just absolutely work. But then you're going back to composition again. The composition is so strong that you could paint it as rough as you like, and it still
Hmm.
works. You know?
So I have to ask, like, when in your career did the Magic the Gathering opportunity happen, and how did that happen? Like, I'm sure in your entire career, it must have been just like a small dot on the timeline, but I'm just curious, like, how did that even come about?
Well, that was we used to go to Comic Con in England, and what was it called UCAC? I can't remember. It was there was a yearly comic convention that came up in England at the time, and now that we were sort of in, when I say we, I mean me and a couple of other guys who had sort of called each other on the phone after we found out we were working in 2000 AD. You'd see somebody else's strip, and then you'd get their phone number and you'd call them up and you'd be like, "Hi, it's Rob Bliss here," and they're like, "Oh, I saw your strip," and blah blah, and then you'd both start talking about how wonderful Simon Bisley was, and how much, you know, what music you liked and all the stuff you start talking about when you're a young bloke meeting someone for the first time, and triggering off a bromance. And then you'd meet up at the comic convention, and you'd have your portfolio with you, all the work you've been doing that year, and then you would try to, I suppose at that point you were already established in with 2000 AD, so you don't have to go and stand in the trying to meet the editor of 2000 AD line, which was a kind of a big queue of people with their portfolio, and
Sure.
we had to. Um, so the next thing was trying to bump into people from DC Comics, etc. So um, I managed to get a couple of covers from DC Comics, which were a much better paid. They would pay an entire, they would support you for a month. I think you'd get about $1,000 or something for a cover. So you'd do one image, get $1,000, and that was enough to kind of like keep you existing for a month or something. Whereas a comic page was, I don't know, like about £150 or something. I can't remember what it was. With shitloads of work you had to do. So it was a no-brainer to start trying to get these meet the guys that could give you covers to do from over in America, because the English comic world was very, very limited. But at the same time, when we went to the comic conventions, you had um, people from Magic the Gathering were there to try and meet people like us, you know, and that's basically how it happened. Walking around and with your portfolio, and Maria Cabado either introduced herself or I introduced myself to her or whatever. But we got talking, and yeah, she was there, I think, to find young artists like us, and for Magic, try and inject something from, I don't know, Britain, the comic industry in Britain or something. But that was basically how it started, and then after that, it was, like doing easier work, and it was like doing one comic panel instead of having to do several on a
Right. It
page.
was like doing one, it's just one image, right, for a
Yeah,
card.
yeah, yeah. That's how it started. Was that the question? How did it start?
Yeah, just how you connected with Wizards of the Coast and Magic the Gathering. And at what point did you connect with Sue Ann Harkey? Because that was she was the art
Around the same,
director at
yeah,
the
around the
time,
same
right?
time. Yeah, it was around the same time, because it was her and Maria that was sort of doing stuff at the same time. I can't remember if Sue Ann was at the very first one or whether that was just Maria. But yeah, I was either communicating with one or the other doing it. But that's stuff that gets lost in the mist of time slightly.
Do you remember what it was like to work with them? I mean, I guess there's some stories on the record about it, but looking back, like what was it like just getting those commissions for the cards? Like what kind of direction did they give you, and
Oh,
um,
they were
what were the
incredible. They were,
timelines like? Just anything you can remember.
yeah, they were incredibly nice. I mean, they even had me go over to flew me over to Seattle, which was great to be able to visit another city that I'd not been to in America, and they flew me over for to talk about a project they wanted me to work on. I think it was a project that got scrapped in the end. But no, I mean they were incredibly nice, and they were made you feel special and stuff. They sort of knew how to treat you. I mean, 2000 AD was always a little bit. Uh, I don't know. I think I'd had enough by the time I'd done finished the clown. I was a little bit. jaded, and so it was nice to be talking to people that you were just they were very enthusiastic about what you were doing, and all I had to do was do a kind of very rough pencil sketch. I mean, this was like stick man type sketches I'd do, because I was also trying to just get on with it. I really, really wanted to do. Um, this is how much time I want to spend on it for the money I'm earning for it. I don't want to say I've got 2 days I want to spend on it, or I've got 3 days I want to spend on it. Comparing to what I'd been earning before, you end up breaking down your pay rate into a daily rate, as it were. Okay, so that I was earning this amount then, so this is how much time I want to spend on this project per day, so that I'm keeping up with that. So yeah, it was trying to get approval off them as quickly as possible with these these ridiculously simple thumbnail sketches and a sort of a written description about what I think I'm going to do. And then I think that was in the days of faxes, where you'd have to go to a local shop and fax off this fucking A4 piece of paper with scribbles on it. And I guess they would call you back and say, yeah, fine, whatever, yeah, get on with it then. And then you'd get on with it and paint it. And I think I used to end up getting the pictures photographed and then send those photographs over. But maybe the early stuff I used to actually put in the mail and send. I mean, it's fucking nuts compared to today. The fact you'd have to fax information off,
Yeah.
then post an actual piece of artwork off to the States and all that sort of stuff. But I don't remember anything negative about the relationship with the people I was working for. They were great to work for. I can see that you're aching to get onto
Right.
the penis. The penis.
Oh no, I'm not
Conversation.
aching to get to the phallic imagery. But I guess because you mentioned it. I mean, just for the record, you that was not your intention to insert subliminal imagery. We talked about it last time. That was not the intent, right?
Yeah.
It's just people made it out to be. Yeah, for the record.
But the funny thing is, I mean, when these stories sort of emerge over time, you think to yourself, well, shall I stick to the narrative that's sort of formed over time because it's more interesting, or shall I just be honest and say it's just bollocks? But I guess it is interesting that I think on reflection, it's interesting that one thing can turn into another. It's interesting that um, what is it we end up calling it? The phallic panic, which doesn't quite work like satanic panic, but it's in the same ballpark. But it was somebody's. All right, the basic story was that somebody's mum or whatever had called in or written a letter, I guess, back in those days to Wizards of the Coast, complaining that I was putting willies in the work. I was kind of trying to sneak in pictures of penises into the paintings that I was doing, and I mean, I can't remember whether I denied it or not at the time, but I mean, I guess I would have done because I wasn't. But then and I can't remember who it was that showed me all of them. There was, I feel like somebody showed me who was in the room with me at the time, so I can't remember who it was. But they were like, yeah, look, I mean, check these. I was like, of course I hadn't put the dicks. I mean, it wasn't like I was feeling like I've been busted for doing something. I was kind of intrigued and kind of amused by it. But they started pointing out there was the rabbit. I did actually promise myself I was going to get the cards out so I could look at them, but I neglected to do that. But the rabbit one, which was metamorphosis or something, was if you turn it on its side,
Polymorph.
polymorph. Turn it on its side, cover up the head of the rabbit. There's a floppy dick and a ball bag. And when they showed it to me, I was thinking, Yeah, all right. There is a kind of a dick and a ball bag there, which I was quite impressed with myself. But I literally impressed with myself because I subliminally done it myself, I guess. But I was, well, I impressed myself because I'd actually drawn a floppy penis and a ball bag on its side. I didn't know I could do that, but apparently, anyway, I did. But
This is your version of the like playing Helter Skelter backwards moment where it's like there's
yeah,
a
yeah,
message there and you
yeah,
had planned it all along apparently. Yeah.
yeah, or what's it? The end of that Queen song where they sing "Fried Chicken." I can't remember what the name of
Right.
the song is, but it ends with them singing "Fried Chicken." Well, it sounds like that, but obviously it's not. But yeah, so sorry, I've just thrown myself by saying "fried chicken." The So they then got the next card out, and there was the card where there's a guy missing a hand, bent over on top of um, what do you call it? A plinth or something. Do you know what I mean? So you got like this big plinth and a bloke right at the top of it who's bent right over with this kind of hand bandaged up, whatever. And they were just like, and that's a dick. And I'm like looking at it going, yeah, that's a dick. But I didn't intend for it to be a dick. But yeah, I'll go along with that. It looks exactly like that. And then the Cyclops picture was the tree, and that was just a big willy. And I looked at it and I was like, yeah, all right, I guess it is. But I didn't intend for it to be. And I can't remember what other ones there were. But basically the outcome of that was you them saying to me, you're going to have to submit much more detailed drawings of what you're going to do in the card, and we are going to vet your sketches for or your roughs for penises, and to make sure that you're not doing it anymore. And it just seemed like I don't know. It just seemed like I was being sort of corporately punished for drawing dicks when I hadn't been drawing dicks. It was just a very odd situation to find myself in. But it was a no-brainer. I didn't want to do it anymore, and I'm sure from their point of view, it was like we couldn't use him anymore, and either narrative is absolutely fine. But that's really what it came down to. It was I didn't do any more work for Wizards after that for a long, long while. I mean, there was another art director that came along who I did do a couple of pictures for, Shrieking Banshee or something, years later. But yeah, but at the time it just seemed like maybe it was just a natural parting of the ways. I don't feel like it affected any relationships at the time. Maybe I'm being naive about that.
Hmm.
But yeah, the truth of the matter is I wasn't putting willies in, um, but I could see them once they were being. I could see why people might think that once they started to think that, you know. But
Well, you didn't put them in intentionally, and it's also as you kind of mentioned like you have to because you're a freelancer at this point already and you get a lot of different gigs like covers, cards, illustrations, so it's like you also have to weigh the time investment, honestly, right? As you mentioned, like calculating a daily rate and things like that, just the business side of things. So, is it
yeah,
fair to say, like, just with their policies, like doing magic cards is just not
no,
really worth it,
I mean,
basically?
that makes me sound more pragmatic than I was. I think just really was a case of whether I could bear to do something or not. There just felt like something humiliating, I guess, about having to. I sort of I sort of enjoyed painting way more than the drawing. So I do a lot of the process in the painting. I didn't really know what it was going to be like um, in these. I didn't. Well, I mean, I didn't work like that all the time. And when I was doing 2000 AD, I suppose I drew a lot more detail in. But in terms of just doing roughs for people, I didn't really understand how much of a how finished they might want the roughs. I just wanted to get the roughs straight out, really, really out the way. Just there's going to be a cyclops here, there's going to be a woman here. That's about and I draw it in 2 seconds to send off because I want to go to the fact shop, which is an annoying thing to have to do anyway, and then get back to my flat and wait for the phone call or whatever. The thought of having to do that process several times whilst they vet my work for dicks that don't exist. And don't forget, by then as well, they're thinking that there are willies in my work. So then I would actively have to
Right.
draw. I mean, think how square I'd have to draw everything. Do you know what I mean? There couldn't be any hill. Do you know
Right.
what I mean? It
There's
would
a
just
reason why phallic imagery is phallic imagery because it's a very common shape. Like literally, I was just actually thinking about this before the recording. Like even this
we literally
microphone
look like
that I
we
have
look
right
like a
now
pair of dicks with
is a
glasses
shape
on.
like this.
We look like a pair of dicks with
Yeah,
glasses on.
I have been
We
told that
go,
my head looks like an egg because of the shape, and it could be like just a
yeah,
round thing. So
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
So
so yeah, that would have been I can't think of something to compare it to, but it just would have been a really weird, awkward process to try and prove that I wasn't doing what I was being accused of doing, at that
yeah,
time. I mean, it wasn't
yeah.
like they were wrong that I wasn't capable of doing something like that. I was, as they knew with me, I was perfectly capable of doing something puerile like that.
Hmm.
But I just, in this instance, I
Hmm.
hadn't, I hadn't been doing that. But it was funny. I
Hmm.
could see them when
Hmm.
they were pointed out to me. And in fact, that I didn't realize that until I looked at that article. But realizing they had actually cropped the polymorph card at one point to try and
To
cover up the
avoid that,
real baggy part.
yeah.
I mean, I just love that detail. I love the fact that they did that because it's so silly, you know. But but it would have been annoying to be engaging in the
Uh,
process of what they needed
what's
from me.
interesting about that is somebody who has been like looking at Magic the Gathering art criticism over the years is that there are people actually that write about, not in your case, but like just in general, how paintings are badly cropped on Magic cards. Like there's actually an examination where it's like, sometimes I have because as Magic players, there's cards that we are very familiar with, and
Yeah,
sometimes you're looking at the full version that's not the card version. You're like, wow, they left out all this detail
right.
on the art of the original artwork. It's a totally
Yeah,
different piece of art, and like there's also something about that. I don't know how to describe it, but there's this whole like literally reframing the image makes it
yeah,
completely different. And I feel like as an artist, there also must be some offense taken at like the cropping of the images because like you have zero control over that as an artist, and they're
yeah,
just gonna do whatever they want and with the
yeah,
frame. You know what I mean?
yeah. I think that was part of one of the things that led me away from doing work that was going to end up being printed was occasionally somebody would flip your artwork as well, and it would just show how dicky it was. Dicky, as in is dicky is a term we use for being kind of skewy. Like when you look at your picture in a mirror, you see how the eyes aren't quite lined up like you thought they were, etc. How warped it is, how bad it looks, and which is why a lot of artists will use a mirror to check how solid their drawing is, and why when I'm on the computer, I flip all the time to make sure that it's kind of look well. When I know it looks the same, whether it's flipped one way or the other, then I know that it's a pretty solid picture. But before then, I was doing these pictures on paper and painting them with acrylic. There wasn't that opportunity. So when somebody received the artwork and decided they would like preferred it the other way round, you'd see the cover and you'd just be pissed off, and that was one of the reasons
Yeah.
that's one of the things that took me away from wanting to do anything that was going to be printed and shown to the public. So um, I'm trying to think what it was. At what point I understood there was a thing, concept art, because I must have thought there was an alternative to doing printed work in order to make that decision. I don't want to do it anymore, you know. But it doesn't. I don't necessarily have to have an alternative in order to walk away from something. Just I'll quit something because I fucking hate doing it. You know, not because I found something better to do, but sometimes you just have to walk away from it anyway, don't you? But yeah,
Yeah,
that could be very annoying.
absolutely. It's
Yeah,
really interesting though, because obviously I haven't lived your life through as you, but just hearing it in hindsight makes me feel like you're someone who's very clear about what he wants and does not want in his craft. And you're going to find the kind of work that suits you. Yeah,
yeah,
for lack of a better term. It's just like, because I think there are artists that are, even myself, like when I do certain creative things, I'm thinking like, okay, I'm getting paid for this, so
yeah,
let's go with it because
yeah,
it's a job, and of course it's a job. It's good. We need to make a living, but there's also a kind of like thing that you have, which is kind of like I'm going to carve out my own path, and I'm going to be me and find the
yeah,
work that corresponds to being me. You know?
yeah. Listen, I mean, the funny thing is, as you spend a lot of adults might look back on their life thinking, I'm glad I don't have to do my 20s again, or I'm glad I don't have to do my 30s again, or I don't want to be a teenager again. You know, it's like you've been there and you've done it. So as pleasurable as certain points in your life are, there's always a sort of a something going on at that period of your life that you just no longer want to repeat. So it's as you get older, you don't necessarily become more in control of your emotional reaction to scenarios or circumstances. You just learn to avoid them. You shape your life in a way that means you avoid those things that you know piss you off. So that it's just a case of when I was younger, I did my fair share of um, doing things that I didn't really realize I didn't want to do. You know, and you end up with a lot of I mean, the way that you sum it up sort of infers that I have some kind of strong notion about what I want to do. It's more that I have an emotional reaction about stuff I don't want to do. And you don't know you don't want to do those things until you're in that scenario, which means that you, at some point in your life, you have to learn how to fucking walk away from things, you know. You have to learn how to
Right.
say, you know, it's scary when you quit stuff. It's a mixture. It's a relief and it's scary. You feel insane and you feel more sane than you've done for a long time when you walk away from things. You know, those moments when the taxi pulls off and you've got all your computer gear in the back of the thing, in the back of the car. This was before I was driving. Now I just drive away, and I'm making myself think that I've only ever quit stuff at a point in my life where I wasn't driving, so I had to call a taxi. But anyway, you you it's a weird one because yeah, it's the way you say it sounds like I've managed to sculpt and mold my life into something I want it to be, but it's a lot more
But
like
it's really just about like learning to eat shit, and then you realize I don't want to eat shit anymore,
I don't want to have a
and
shit. Yeah, I
let's
don't.
find
This
another
shit
way. It's
sandwich is
not
disgusting. I don't want to eat it, and then you go and or like I'm sure you've shared a flat with other guys before when you were younger, and that's how you paid your rent and everything. But if you were as you get older, you shouldn't be living with
Oh yeah, I'm not doing that again. No.
guys. Yeah, so you earn money and money becomes your way of is about freedom, and therefore you
Right.
um I mean I'll always tell young people at a certain point they should learn to quit because it makes me slightly nervous and I think it's a little bit sad if you're one of 1,000 young people who say you're at a convention together, so there's a lot of you, I don't know whether it'd be 1,000 or 2,000. I don't know how many people tend to go to Lightbox or Playground, but there must be a sort of a, or actually looking at portfolios and stuff, you do get a sense that people are trying to conform to something. They're being taught to please somebody in a corporation. Here's a page of 100 variations on a werewolf or a dragon or something, and writing that goes with it and all this sort of stuff. And I always think you should just have the one big image that's very impressive, but and the other one is demonstrating your willingness to draw 1,000 pictures to please the boss, and that might be something that you have to prove to games people, that you can generate 1,000 thumbnails for the art director. That might be something you have to do, but that would never have been a route for me. I think I was always a bit too stroppy for that. I think I would have been, look, here's my one picture of a dragon. Can you not see how fucking awesome it is? Even though 10 years
Like,
later,
take it or leave it kind of thing.
yeah. I mean, I would have looked back on that picture and gone, I can't believe I was being so fucking arrogant or whatever. But that was my attitude. But it was also a case of, I suppose I didn't have that many versions of any creature inside my head to draw. I just wanted to draw the one thing, and I believed that I would generate one really great looking thing. So, having completely forgotten what the question was, I think we were talking about carving out your career, etc. That a certain part of it, I think, is just about your personality. You are who you are, and also there's something about doing comics as well that's so about an individual selling their wares. My big influence was this particular artist who to me was like a rock star, had bags of attitude in his work. So kind of that appealed to me. That's something I wanted to be, and it must have sort of chimed with me as well. I was never going to be knocking at the door of a games company with a portfolio that was geared towards them thinking I would slot in nicely into the machinery of how the place generates their work. So I find it alien when I see people are doing it, and I wonder whether they feel they have to do it. I'm wondering whether the colleges that they're at that teach them that they're expected to produce this amount of thumbnails and this, that, and the other. And also you've got the horrific concept of speed painting, which of course must be a pressure on young people. I mean, it's not so trendy now as it used to be a few years ago, and I don't doubt the validity of what an effective way it is to learn something, to do speed painting. But I mean, talk about people being put under pressure. You get an amazing image put on Instagram or what would it be, ArtStation or whatever. No, they're not doing it so much nowadays. Like, here's a picture, 15-minute speed painting. And if you were a young or you'd get another page with I did all these thumbnails in 10 minutes, and there's 1,000 of them. If you were a young person, I could completely imagine why you're just shitting yourself and nervous trying to get into the industry, thinking what's expected of you.
Sure.
And I just happened to start off when none of that existed. I wasn't, but I don't think my personality would ever have allowed me to have done that. I don't think my personality would have allowed me to sat down and studied how to do speed paintings and stuff.
I think with any creative pursuit, you gotta find like the boundary of what you're willing to tolerate or to learn or to be involved in, right? And there's something that's out of bounds that it's different for everybody.
Yeah, but you don't know what it's going to be in advance. I mean, that's the whole thing about life, isn't it? You learn who you are as time goes on. You learn what you're like as time goes on. And I I suppose the unflattering way of summing up would be to say that I would strop off from certain circumstances. I would just be right. I've had enough now. I'm off, and you feel like you've committed some kind of crime by not putting up with what other people are expecting from you. But it's a good way to just learn what you do and don't want. There's the thing that happens in
Right.
film as well, where people get onto films into art departments as assistants, and they're making coffee for people, and they're being very, very deferential, and they're doing all the menial work, and occasionally they get given a picture to draw, and they're very grateful for it, and then they get it interrupted to have to go and make teas for people and stuff like that. And then there's after about a year or so of doing this, eventually they're just going to be a bit more stroppy about it. They're like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want, like the beginning of the project, you might get offered a cup of tea a bit more than you are by the end of the project, because the assistants are starting to get pissed off with having to pretend that they are amenable and pliable, and do you know what I mean? And that's the point that they progress.
Yeah.
That they, if you keep proving your worth by bowing down to people and stuff, and proving how much they can bend you to their will, then that's where you're going to stay. And
Right.
you have to show it. You have to show your fangs at some point, and then what will be a surprise to you is that you go up at that point, because at that point you think that all you have
Right.
to do is to be what we would call butlering, acting like a butler to people. Very good, sir. Yes, whatever you want, sir. Yes.
Or I would call it like a very extreme version of being agreeable, because I think society wants us to be agreeable. But when you're agreeable, there are people that can take advantage of those power structures and
Yeah.
just keep taking advantage of you because
Yeah.
you want to give them tea where you offered.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a point that you have to become disagreeable, and it's a revelation for you, because your career doesn't end, and in some cases it might actually progress as a result of it. But that's if you're involving yourself in a hierarchy. I've never knowingly involved myself in a hierarchy. I realise that I am in a hierarchy now, but I didn't know I was in it. But if you join an art department on a film, you start at the bottom and you work your way up to the top. It's a very structured hierarchy.
What kind of hierarchy are you in now?
Well, it's variable. I mean, it has a glass ceiling on it for a start. Can a hierarchy have a glass ceiling on it, or are we mixing up art? We're not mixing up
Sure, it
metaphors.
can.
We're mixing
Yeah,
up
I mean,
anyway. But the
that's
hierarchy
fine.
has the hierarchy involves being you either have your tires pumped up or your tires slashed, depending on what project you're on. You know, you if in film, if you're a head of department, if you're in a hierarchical sort of position, you might work your way up to becoming the head of department, and then at some point you might have a name plaque on your parking space at the studio, and you get to go to the big boy meetings and to give your opinion on stuff. And that's your right, because you're the head of that department. If you're a storyboard artist or a concept artist, you're relying on the goodwill of other people as to whether your how your verbal opinion is judged on something, or if you turn up at the studios, it's not really up to you straight away necessarily where you're going to sit, or even where you get an office, whether you get an office or not. So you might arrive somewhere and you're just told to sit over there by the window where the sun's fucking glaring in, and then you have to be an arsehole by saying I don't want to sit there because but so you might arrive on another film and they're just like, yeah, we've got an office down the corridor for you on the right, and we've blacked out the windows for you, and settle in and enjoy yourself. And so hierarchically you're in two completely different places on those two projects, and you've got no idea where you are on that hierarchy until you've literally walked into that art department. So the answer to where I am hierarchically, it depends. It just depends on the project. and you have to feel your way through every single project, and there's new combinations of hierarchy that appear all the time as well, because you know, um, somebody might arrive on a, as the tectonic plates of the film industry sort of move around, you get new positions being created and new hierarchies. And on a TV show, you've got the showrunner, who tends to be more powerful than the director. That doesn't exist in film. The showrunner doesn't have that much power or whatever. So you suddenly find out, oh, this is the person that I have to defer to, or this is the person making all the decisions, etc. And I think moving to the countryside and working from home, by and large, it sort of takes you away from all of that. So to a large degree, maybe now I've removed myself from hierarchy. But as I said, you're never sure. You're never sure exactly. You have to feel your way through it each time.
Did you have good experiences working on some of the projects that, when I think about your name, I definitely associate you with some of the concept and designs for Guardians of the Galaxy? I think Harry Potter, Dobby, the elf from Harry Potter, which is a very recognizable thing in the movie. Uh, did you have good general experiences working for these big studios, or is it, as
Well,
you said, it really depends
I mean, if I
on?
take those two examples, that they're very different from each other, but they were still both good at the happier end of experiences in film. I mean, look, I'm sure, like yourself, I can always find ways to be annoyed on any daily basis. So I'm never having
That's
something.
human nature. Yeah.
Yeah, you're even when you're at the beach, you're kind of dealing with sand in between your toes, aren't you, and,
Yeah.
and all that sort of bollocks. But that aside, Potter was amazing in a way. I mean, I sort of reassess it over time as well, because it's over time you realise you were part of a phenomenon, and 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 there's a certain privilege with having that opportunity in life, And I mean, I don't use that term lightly. It really was. I should be very grateful to have been involved with it, and what it means to people, etc. I mean, yeah, that goes for Magic the Gathering as well. I'm meeting a lot of people nowadays when I go to conventions who
Sure, but let's be real. Harry Potter impacted a lot more people than Magic the Gathering. I'll just say that as a Magic the Gathering fan.
right,
Yeah,
okay,
I
okay,
mean they're all equally great, but yeah,
yeah, but Mike, what I mean, I'm comparing the two, or putting them in the same sort of envelope together, because um, it might have been that when I was a number of years ago, something like Dobby, my opinion on him was, oh, I would have preferred that visual effects had done this, that, and the other with the design. Then I would have been happier with it. Do you know what I mean? So I viewed it in terms of
oh, okay. There's
somebody.
some nitpicks where you wish it
Yeah,
was a little
I was
different.
nitpicking
Okay,
with it.
yeah,
Yeah, and then you go to me and Dermot used to go and sort of do talks or chats with people down at the Warner Brothers exhibition down near London at Leavesden, and you realise how much it sort of means to people, and then you get introduced to other people, and their kids love Dobby and all, and over time you stop nitpicking, and you realise they they love him as a character, and it means a lot to them, and the magic stuff as well. It's taken people coming up to me asking if I'll sign cards for them, and me perhaps being a little bit reticent, and then them telling me how much the cards mean to them in order to get me to sign the cards. And um, in that interaction, if that interaction's repeated a few times, you start to view Wizards of the Coasts and the work you did as being kind of a nice little thing you did in your life, and you sort of you basically you reevaluate. Look, whatever happened is one thing. Your reevaluation of it based on people that are now adults but grew up with these cards and were and had some meaning in those cards, and that that you end up reevaluating what you think about it. But the actual experiences themselves were on those two films were pretty good. I mean, the culture on Potter was amazing. I mean, you had, in terms of, and I'd say this goes with working for Maria and Sue-Ann Harkey as well. That when your bosses are nice and they're good people, when the people are nice at the top, you get a trickle down effect of people being pleasant. The culture at the company is good, and Harry Potter was very, very much like that, and I think it led to a lot of good design decisions as well. It's amazing how they didn't shy away from the books being, the scary aspect of those books for kids, or how English the books were, because the whole thing's based in sort of England, or Britain, because it's Hogwarts actually up in Scotland. Is it in Scotland? It is for filming purposes anyway. But I was working for good people, and they enjoyed the creative process, and they enjoyed the work I was doing. And so despite all the other just annoyances of just being a human being, I was very, very fortunate to work on them, and we had our own football pitch there as well, which was incredibly enjoyable or incredibly annoying, depending on whether we won or lost at lunchtime playing football. But we had loads of space, and we had freedom, and we had way more control back then over stuff. So I was very lucky to be able to hold on to all these characters for months and develop them, and you wouldn't be able to get away with that nowadays. So I was I'm very grateful to that, but it was good. But and Guardians of the Galaxy was like a different situation. It was, what, we're going 15, 20 years on from there or something, and I was working for Legacy, so the whole thing was me at home in the countryside now. No more studios, emailing work off to them, no contact with the director whatsoever or the producers, just the guys at Legacy. But it was a hugely enjoyable project to work on. The subject matter was really, really silly, and the sort of stuff I don't get hold of very often. I might do, like Death Eater masks are very good to be able to get to design on one level, but they're very gothic. There's no humour in them. But these bunch of sort of experimental baddie creatures were awesome to be given free reign over them, and the work was always very appreciated. And James Gunn seemed to react very well to the work. You just happened to have picked out two projects that went very, very well, and were really, I was very fortunate to work on both of them. James Gunn was big by then. I think he had established himself as a director that could do what James Gunn does. He had proved himself at the box office, I guess.
Creative control. Yeah,
creative. He had creative control, yeah. And if you can work for somebody who enjoys the creative process, or you can work for somebody who enjoys the really puerile aspect of your work, then for me I'm in a very fortunate spot. It's not as for me, it's not always that. It's quite, I wouldn't say it's rare to meet a director that enjoys the creative process, or a boss that enjoys the creative process. It's not strictly true, but it's not always the case. But it's massively important if you do, because you're then involved with somebody who trusts you're going to come up with the goods at some point, and they trust that they know that playing is a part of getting a good result. And if you're working for somebody who doesn't understand either of those things, they're going to be nervous until you get there, and they're going to think you're time wasting unless you get there in a way which makes them not nervous, which usually involves drawing a sheet of 1,000 fucking thumbnails so they can pick one. And I'm trying to remember the point that I was going to make. I can't remember what was.
Well, just that there's a kind of shared language or wavelength that you and James Gunn seem to have, because he's a comic book fan
Yeah, I mean, look,
fundamentally,
I've
so
got to
he
say,
understands where that's
yeah,
coming from.
I've never met him, but my work seems to have chimed with him, you know, and you know, but I get on very well with the guys at Legacy, you know, that I work for, and but that it might be that I suspect that he might be a tooth as well as a DC and a Marvel reader when he was younger. I suspect he was into 2000 AD as well. I think there's an Anglophile in there somewhere, you know, and
Yeah.
there was I don't know how familiar you are or were with 2000 AD as a comic with Judge Dredd.
Just a little bit.
Okay, okay,
I mean, Judge Dredd definitely was in my
yeah,
childhood. I mean,
yeah.
the movies, of course, but yeah, also the graphic novels and the comics. Yeah,
Would
yeah.
the
We had some of that in Canada.
Oh, okay. The director, do you know Paul Verhoeven, the director? He did,
Yeah, he did RoboCop and a whole bunch of movies.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now his sort of the feel he has in his movies is of doing comedy incredibly straight. Do you know what I mean? He makes these
Hmm.
these
Oh yeah.
comedy movies that are just played straight, and that's what
Yeah. Starship
2000 AD.
Troopers was another one I
Yeah,
loved.
yeah.
Yeah.
And 2000 AD had that feel about it. Judge Dredd was a very serious character, but he was a comedy character, you know. But it wasn't. But you couldn't play.
Hmm.
It wouldn't work if it was played for laughs. And that was the other thing when Alan Grant did Lobo with Simon Bisley. That was the only time I've ever read a comic and laughed out loud when reading it, you know. And as you know from talking to me, I don't often laugh out loud, but I suspect that there's a bit of an Anglophile in James Gunn, but I'm presuming that because I've never met him. But and also the music as well that he puts in his movies, you know. But
Right.
I think my work probably chimes with him because I'm all those subconscious influences that I've absorbed over time through reading 2000 AD, and you know, I was never a Marvel or a DC kid growing up. I just wasn't really that interested in it, you know. But British comics I would
Hmm.
sort of just read, not as a fan. They would arrive every Saturday, and all my friends read 2000 AD and stuff, you know. And then we'd probably run around involving it
Right.
in our play a little bit and stuff. But yeah, maybe I've you know, my work was chiming a little bit with him just because they're subliminal influences that for him as well. Some of the stuff that I grew up with. I think we're both in our 50s, perhaps, the same age. So I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, one thing that I took away from the panel that I watched is that I think there's some things that translate better to a live setting. Somehow having this kind of like technological barrier of doing the podcast over the internet makes it a little bit harder. I dare say you're a lot funnier in person, like with your dry wit and like in the room. I think there's cues that are easier to pick up on. I'm not saying, by the way, I'm not saying like I have not enjoyed this conversation. I've
yeah. That's
enjoyed this one as well as one
what
we
I was
had
taking away from
last
that
week, but I definitely, yeah.
yeah. No, moving beyond you telling me I'm not funny, which is fine because I recognise what you're saying. No, it's I can come across as being incredibly fucking serious and stiff in this kind of setup. Do you know what I mean? But but look, let's be honest as well. In this day and age, you're not going to be. If somebody records something, you're not going to be openly. Um,
There's an extra layer of guardedness.
yeah, yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's the whole artifice of recording something.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
slightly more sort of like bottled up. You know, you
Right.
I think I tend to be like that with people. I'm kind of, my answers are really quite serious and plodding until I get to know them a little bit. You know what I mean? And then it naturally I start to be a bit more animated and a bit more um, funny about stuff. You know, but listen, the other thing is that most of humor that I like and most of my humor is based on misfortune. You know, I love the humor in misfortune, and quite often that can be misconstrued. I think in a when you're chatting to somebody over the internet that you've met a couple of times, you say something that you think is funny because it's so fucking sad, and they might just say, "Don't worry about it. You know, it's fine." And then you're thinking, "Oh fuck, it wasn't." I was saying that because I thought it was funny, but
Yeah.
it turns out they didn't realise that. But yeah, you
Right.
do. But listen,
Right.
I don't
Right.
know. I all of these situations are a bit weird. I mean, being talking on a panel with Dermot at Lightwave, Lightbox, keep on mixing those up, isn't exactly fucking natural anyway. Um, I mean, how long does it take to before you're natural with anyone? It could take me an instant, or it could take me a long while. But I think there's certain things have to be acknowledged, or I have to subconsciously clock certain things with people before I can um, get over um, just being a bit zipped up, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I'm like the classic introvert that's kind of had to learn because I like doing the interviews how
yeah,
to um get into it more quickly. Because I'm not really like speaking to the artifice, like I'm not like this in everyday life actually. I'm actually the flip side. Like it's harder for me to get to know somebody uh if I meet them at a gathering. I don't really know how to do small talk and
yeah,
how to do the socializing. And
yeah,
whereas it's like maybe this is something about introverts is like we just want to get to the like let's just ask Rob like the big questions and like how did you get started in your career? Like how did you what's it like working on Harry Potter? And it's just like somehow I feel like what you're saying about like you figured out a way to do the kinds of work that you want to do in some weird way, I've kind of done that now with interviews. Like,
okay,
like it's a very specific lane that I've chosen.
yeah,
Because I'll be honest, like I'll do this interview with you, and I'm just like, that's it. That's all the socialization I wanted today,
right,
and I am good like for the whole day, you know.
yeah.
Because I you know what I mean, right? Like it's all kind of crazy if
It's
you think about it. Like
it,
just
it,
two people talking to each other on the internet and just like,
it's
yeah,
fucking.
yeah.
I was about to say it's fucking exhausting. It's not. It's not exhausting, but it's. I can understand from your point of view that it would be. There's a lot of mental energy into interacting with people that I think people kind of underestimate. You know, I mean, I find certain social situations fucking excruciating. I really, really do. But and then other ones
Yeah,
I'm
honestly,
really
for me,
like.
most social situations are
Oh really?
excruciating. But yeah,
Yeah. See, that pleases me. I'm
yeah,
happy to.
yeah,
I'm I'm enjoying your
yeah.
discomfort
I,
in most
I,
social
that's why
situations.
I was really when you talked about playing your records, at an event, I was just like, wow, that's the perfect thing for me. I can just listen to Rob spin the B-52s, and that's
Yeah.
like that's
Oh, you
that's good
mean
with
the
me,
the original
Yeah, we don't
concept
have
of?
to talk.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, I. It's funny actually because I came up with the idea of doing that so that I could avoid talking at these things, at these
There you
conventions.
go.
But no, but I've ended up talking and playing records, and I've only done it
Okay.
twice so far. But it's sort of it's a project that's in development, let's say. But it went well. It went well. But it also is a frightening thing to do. It's you think to yourself, oh look, I'm going to try this thing out, and then when you find yourself doing it, you're like, why do I do these things to myself? And then when an hour later you've managed to pull it off, you think, all right, well I'll do that
Yeah.
again. You know.
Then you're kind of pleased with it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the next time I'll shit myself again, and I don't know. I mean, over time, maybe if I do
Yeah.
manage
It's
to
just
do it. more often, then I will become more relaxed with it. But it's outcome dependent. I could spill. I mean, listen, I wouldn't have a bottle of beer in my hand, but I could do anything to make a massive tit of myself when I'm doing it. And maybe I should explain what we're talking about, which is trying to add the idea to an event where I engineer a situation where I'm able to DJ and play old 7-inch records, and usually from my formative years. So they're kind of like either punk or post-punk music or some sort of electronic music from the 80s or the 70s, probably more the 80s because there's more of it around. But and as we were discussing before, your formative years were more Britpop based, but for me that wasn't the case. I'm if I was to spin records and be sort of genuine about it, there is a certain period of time that I would be picking from. Um, and also there were lots of singles around from that period as well. During the 90s, there were a lot of bits of music that I was listening to that you just can't get singles for. But so anyway, the idea was to play old singles, and it was based on a sort of a nostalgia when I started buying old singles again, just enjoying the packaging and these, and as we have here. So playing those, and you were saying that you had that with your Magic the Gathering cards as well. That there's a certain sort of nostalgia for, the getting a whole pack of cards out, and maybe the shape of them and the way they feel and the smell of them and all that sort of stuff brings back a sort of a visceral joy from when you were younger, and it sort of sticks with you, And so I was hoping that I would I want to continue going to these conventions, and I've not been to a Magic convention, but never say never. But I was trying to avoid doing so much talking at them because I sort of felt like I didn't really have much to say. But I've ended up playing records and talking at these things, and which is kind of turning out all right, actually. I just have to make sure I don't listen back to anything. That's my rule. Don't fucking listen.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you have to
Well,
listen back to these things all the time.
I'm beyond that. After you listen to yourself when you're editing, like for the 1,000th, what 1,000 times, like
Yeah.
it's all good. It gets easier.
And
Yeah,
how does your
yeah.
voice sound
So
to you?
it's you have to.
But how does your voice sound to
Uh,
you?
it sounds fine. I mean, the first few times it was more challenging, I think, for anybody to
But
listen
what do you
back
like? For
to
instance, when I listen
themselves,
back,
but it gets better over time.
when I listen back to myself,
Yeah.
I thought I was like, have I injected myself with something? Am I? I just sounded like way slower, more like a zombie on smack. That was my sort of
Yeah.
way. When I would hear myself talking back, was like, do I really fucking talk like that? Did you have that with you when you listened back to yourself? Like, is
Uh,
my voice really
a
that
little
high
bit,
pitched?
and
Or
also just
I'm not saying your
and
voice is high
and
pitched, but
it's
that
it's
kind
not
of
just that, but it's also just the way that the interviews progress. So I think in the same way that you might, and I hate to say this because maybe it sounds pretentious if you're not a podcaster or interviewer, but I'm more looking at my recordings from like how do I do better in terms of asking questions and structuring and not saying like or 100
oh, okay,
times. So my voice itself doesn't bother me, but the way I structure it does bother me.
yeah,
It makes me
oh,
want
okay,
to improve. And maybe in the same way that when you look at your I just said okay, I just said I wasn't going to say it, but I did. So just like when you're looking at your own artwork, you have to look at it. So
yeah,
I look at the recording as my version of the
oh, okay, yeah,
artwork. And
yeah,
because I've decided I want to get better at this, I have to
yeah,
look at it. Whereas I think
yeah,
if you're speaking at an event, it's more like an optional thing that you kind of opted into. So you don't really have to get yourself into a state where you're comfortable with your voice, if you know what I mean, because
yeah,
that's
yeah,
not the main
but you
your
were,
main art. You know what I
but
mean?
s- yeah, but you might have done something like a year ago or 6 months ago, and somebody says, "Oh, I saw that thing you did at so and so," and they might make a positive comment about it, and
Oh,
so
that's true.
you think, "Oh, well, all right, I'll go and check it out." I thought I sounded like um, a boring twat for all the time I was speaking, and then you go back and you listen to it, and you're left thinking, "Oh fuck, I, it was as bad as I thought it was," and so eventually I just reached the conclusion of I tell you what, it's similar to one's career anyway. You're constantly trying to put these various different things together. If I do put A with B, then hopefully I'll get C, and oh well, that didn't fucking work, and then and then oh that did work, and it's always feedback from the people you're working from to a degree. You know, you're always part of the sculpting process of your career. In terms of your career, is one of the forces is feedback you're getting from people, and if you're a freelancer, you're getting a lot of feedback coming back all the time. So you're constantly trying things out and they don't work. And this type of thing is the same sort of thing where um, you get invited to a convention, you want to talk about, well, you don't want to talk about something, but you have to talk about something. And afterwards, you think, well, that didn't work because you watch it back and it's boring or whatever, or this, that, and the other. And then I start trying to do this DJ thing as well to make it more interesting. And then you sort of, over time, through success and failure, craft how you're going to hone your where you're going to go and the approach you're going to have to it, you know. And I think that probably goes back to an earlier question you were talking about. Generally, with trying to do the things you want to do in your career, it really just is based on um, your whole approach to it gets sculpted by your good and bad experiences over time, you know.
Yeah.
And then from
Yeah.
every moment in your life, you go forward with where you are at that point, and continue to get challenged. You know, there's no end of history, as it were, with
Exactly.
what you do.
Yeah.
There's always a kind of the next bit that you can't quite predict, you know. And
Yes.
so, yeah, you just take the wins with the losses and keep trying to make it better, you know.
Right.
Try to say
Right.
less.
Even something like interviewing people, I just feel like if I even don't do it for there was a period of time where I was doing a lot and I
Yeah,
definitely felt better,
yeah,
but now I've kind of ramped it down. I'm only doing one every month and now I feel sloppy again.
yeah, yeah,
You know what I mean? It's like if you
yeah,
just stop doing it or even like long distance running, I'm really into that. Like if you just stop for a few days, you just feel kind of crappy into it. And then there's
yeah,
some part of me that's just like I want to
yeah,
do it. I need to do it more to
yeah.
you never get perfect at it. Yeah.
Well, it's getting it into muscle memory, isn't it? I mean, it's you know, I as soon as I feel comfortable enough in a particular situation, a certain aspect of me comes out through muscle memory, and then it might be quite different to the person you know talking over the internet like this, you know. But it's all there lurking down there. How the fuck do you get it to the surface as quickly as possible, you know? But you're going to have like a an assistant who makes sure that you're fully massaged and everything before you do your interviews in future. Like if you were James Corden, he probably has a masseur backstage who's makes sure that he's properly relaxed and you know has had the right herbal tea before.
Oh, I mean,
But,
you can never 100% guarantee success. It's been great chatting with you,
yeah,
and thank you so much for taking the time.
it's my pleasure. I hope you were able to stitch something together from this.